Hi all, welcome to a new session of Azure Data Factory. So far we have covered the first tab of the copy activity, that is the general tab. After this we are going to cover the source tab, and in that too we are going to specifically focus on source dataset, file path type, file path in dataset, wildcard file path. These are the two options that we are going to explore in more detail, and simultaneously we are going to talk about a concept that is very helpful while making pipelines in Azure Data Factory called as parameters, but for sake of simplicity, let's call it placeholders now. Okay, so without wasting any further time, let me go to my portal. Fine, so here we are in the Azure portal. Let me go to my resource group. So in the session 4, we were working on log analytics workspace. Since we do not need this workspace anymore, let me just go ahead and delete this. Just copy paste the name. So please remember, whatever resources you do not need, please delete them as soon as possible so that your cloud cost is minimum. Okay. Now let's go to our data factory. Let's open our Azure data factory. And in that, we are going to take a look at our pipeline that we have created in our earlier session. So this is our pipeline that copies customers.csv file from a source directory to the sink, and in this source we are going to look at our source dataset and file path type, first two options, that is file path in dataset and wildcard file path. Okay, so if you go to source dataset, we have created this dataset in advance, but if you want to make any changes, you can click on open. So this will open the dataset that you have created. Right now we had something like this. So we had a directory known as customers.source, and in that at we were looking at customers.csv. So now if you see, I have made the change, so that is why there is a black dot that is appearing. That means now there is a change that we have made, so we have to publish it to save the changes. Okay, now if you just want to see that your file is there or not, you can preview the data and it will show you the content if the file exists in the customers underscore source directory. So let's wait for a couple of seconds. In the meantime, let me go ahead and check if the file is present in the location or not. We go to storage browser, go to my blob containers, go to data, customers, source. Yes, the file is present. I don't know why it is taking such a long time. It should be fast. Let it be. So in the source data set, we have data that is going to be our container name. After this, we have to give up the path, that is a directory, and we have customers.csv. So this is what we saw. Now if suppose you want to give the name, yeah, so now the preview is up. If you see, so we have index, customer id, first name, last name, company, city, country, phone to, email, and all. So you can see a preview of the data. So everything is looking good. Fine, let me go ahead and reduce the size and close it. Fine. Now if you want to make a change where your requirement is, if I want to move a file, I should give the file name and file path before executing the pipeline. So I don't want to hard code the file path and file name, but instead of that I want to give it as an input. Like if you are aware of the programming in Python, so when you want to create a logic that should be reused, you create a function for that, and whatever input you pass, based on that the logic is executed. So similarly, this data set as of now is hard coded, so it is only going to look for customers underscore source directory, and in that too we are going to look only for customers.csv. Okay, so for now let's keep everything as it is, and I'm publishing it. Okay, so publishing is done. Now there are three options. So if you have file path type as file path in dataset, so it is going to pick whatever you have hard coded here. So customers underscore source customer.csv, so this file is going to be copied. Now let me just go ahead and look at the sync. So in the sync we will come into this later, but right now let me just hard code the sync also. So customers underscore sync, and in that I'm going to say customer1 dot csv. Okay, so let me publish this. Done. Okay, now for sake of simplicity I'm not going to trigger the pipeline. Instead of that I'm just going to validate and use the debug. So now the pipeline has started executing. We are going to see customer1 dot csv appear here if the pipeline is successful. So right now it is queued. It succeeded. Okay, so let me refresh my sync directory, and you can see customer1 dot csv. Fine. Now let's go back to our copy activity, and as I had mentioned, I am now having a requirement where I want to give the name of the file and the path where the file is in customers dot source customer source directory during my pipeline execution. So simply we just have to go to wildcard file path, and now here if you see it is already coming like this. Okay, now if you are using hard coded value it is coming like this, but suppose if you want to give this as input as an input during pipeline execution, so you can add dynamic content. So what dynamic content is, instead of giving the name here you are going to define a placeholder. So that placeholder is a parameter, as we see in our programming languages. So when you create a function you pass parameters. So parameters are basically placeholders for the actual variables. So instead of giving the directory name you are going to say that this parameter is going to define the directory, and similarly there will be a separate parameter that is going to define the file. Okay, so I'm going to click on add dynamic content. So there are two ways to do it. If you just come out of the activity, you just click anywhere outside this activity, you can see the parameter. So I'm gonna go this way. It is like very straightforward. So I will say source file path. Again, follow a naming rule, whatever suits you, and then source file name. Okay, and let's create two more for sync dataset. So I'm going to say sync file path, and I'm going to say sync file name. Suppose you want to make sure that if you do not provide any value, there should be pipeline execution with the default value. So you provide the default value here. So let's suppose source file path, I'm saying customers hyphen source, customers dot csv, and this one is going to be customers hyphen sync. This is going to be customers hyphen, or let's suppose I say customer one dot csv. So this is how it is. Okay, now your parameters are defined, your default value for the parameters are defined. Now you have to replace your actual names with these placeholders. So you have to delete your actual hard coded values from both source and sync datasets. Okay, so here also you have to delete both. Okay, now you go ahead here in the source and you say add dynamic content. So whatever you created in your pipeline as parameters, all those parameters will be visible here. So I am going to click on source file path, and pipeline parameters will always be appended with at the rate pipeline soft brackets dot parameters dot parameter name. Okay, so here I'm going to give source file name, and similarly if I go to sync dataset, I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to say, okay, I think here I have to do some changes. Yeah, fine. So we have to parameterize this dataset also. So I'm going to click on this and I'm going to create source. I'm going to say sync file path pipeline parameter, and here also I'm going to say sync file name. Okay, now just take a look at how these parameters are different than the one that we just gave. Okay, so we defined parameters in pipeline, so that is why when we are going into source and we are giving these parameters, it is coming as at the rate pipeline dot parameters dot parameter name, because it's a pipeline parameter, whereas here we are making change in the data set. So if you see this icon, this denotes a data set, whereas this icon, this denotes a pipeline. So we are giving these parameters directly in the pipeline, that is why it is coming at the rate pipeline parameter, whereas we are passing these values in the data set, so that is why it's a data set parameter. Okay, now if you come back and look at your sync, there are two values that your data set is asking you to give. So in this sync file path, this is the dataset parameter, and the sync file name, this is also a dataset parameter. You have to give value in these two fields. Now there are two ways to give. Either you hard code. Okay, this is going to be the same as giving directly in our dataset. Okay, or you pass the values from your pipeline. So this is going to be something like, let me open and explain you in the notepad. So from the pipeline, you are going to pass pipeline parameter to sync datasets, sync dataset parameter. Okay, so your pipeline parameter will be given by you, and this pipeline parameter will pass the value to dataset parameter. So it's like a is equal to b, and then b is equal to c. So this is how chaining of parameter is taking place in the pipeline. So from pipeline level, it is going into the dataset. So again, I'm going to click on add dynamic content, and I'm going to say in the sync file path, I'm going to say sync file path, and here you see it's at the rate pipeline, not at the rate dataset, because now this is the pipeline parameter, not the dataset parameter. Okay, and here I'm going to say sync file name, sync file. And by the way, you can change this also. So if you click on dot, you can get all. So sync file name, everything is looking good. Let me validate. Okay, and let me publish. And I'm deleting this one. Fine. So in this source, we saw file path in dataset. For wildcard file path, there are two options. So we are trying the dry option where we are just passing the values, and there is a filter also. So that filter we are going to see in our next session, filtered by last modified. So for now, let me just click on debug. So as soon as you click on debug, you will get all the four parameters and their default values are pre-populated. Now I'm going to keep everything as it is. Instead of customer1.csv, I'm saying customer2.csv. So let's see how what happens. It succeeded. Okay. Now let's look at the input. So if you see, these two things are our parameters values, customers underscore source customer.csv. So these are the default values. And if you come down, so this was the input, and in the output, let me check. I think there will be a parameter here as well. No, here there are no parameters. Okay, no problem. Let me just go back to refresh. Yeah, so customer2.csv. Now if I have to rerun this debug, and if I say customer3.csv, you will see same file, essentially the same data as customer.csv, but there will be a new file customer3.csv created. You see, customer3.csv. And there can be an interview question like, if you keep your file name as blank, then what will happen? So let's try that as well. Okay, and I will also recommend you not to keep your file name as blank, and you will see the reason why. So if I go ahead and run it again, and I say I don't need this one. Okay, so I'm keeping sync file name as blank. It is not going to complain. So if you run it, it will be successful. But we expect that the name of the source will come as the name of the sync. Let's see what happens. So we are expecting customers.csv in our destination, customers sync. It succeeded. Okay, now let's look at the data. This is customer1.csv, because we are giving the default value here. Okay, so in the parameters we are giving customer1.csv as default. So let me remove this one as well. That way there will be no default value. So you are not passing any value as well, and there is no default value. So let's see what is the behavior of the pipeline. So keep in mind, when you are giving the default value, even if you keep the value of that parameter as blank while debugging or while executing, it is always going to pick the default value after it. So if you click on parameter and remove the default value and then run the pipeline, it will pick the parameter's default value before executing. So you have to make sure that if you trying to do an experiment where you do not want to keep that parameter value, make sure do not have anything in default as well. It succeeded. Okay, let's see what it is. So this is how it will look like. So there will be some data underscore random characters. So always try to give the name of your file, otherwise you will land up with this kind of name. It's a huge name, there is no sense. So you just just look at it and figure out what exactly it is. It is having .txt extension because you have set delimited as a file type while creating your data set. So that is why we either keep default to make sure that we are safe if we do not provide any value in our data set, in our parameter, and if we do not give any value in default also, this is how it will look like. And just to make sure you understand better, try doing this one more thing. Instead of running with sync file path, remove the sync file path and keep the default value, and then remove the default value also, and then run pipeline again and see what happens, because this is going to be an interesting use case. So you just see the behavior of the pipeline, and that way you will be able to understand the source and sync activities with parameters and without parameters better, and that will help you in giving interviews as well. So that was all for today's session. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like, share and subscribe, and see you in the next session. Thank you so much.